I came to bury sin.
Cursed spite that ever I was born to set it.
Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?
This is the excellent foppery of the world.
As a child, I was absolutely besotted by poetry. I trained at the Central School of Speech and Drama back in 1946 as a voice teacher. So I started off then, and it was a great school run by a wonderful woman called Gwyneth Thurban, who had the most amazing sense of humour, but was very clear and down to earth. She was a good socialist, so I liked her. And she had one eye, so you never knew quite when she was looking at you, which was great. But she had a wonderful sense of humour, I remember. Anyway, and then I taught voice to many actors. I went and taught in schools for voice and verse speaking. And then I taught a lot of actors privately, voice. I worked with Sean Connery when he first started out. The thing that changed my life, I suppose, was back in 1969 when Trevor Nunn, who was running the Royal Shakespeare Company at that time, asked me to join the company, and it was the first company to employ a voice person as a regular person in the company to work with actors. He felt that young actors didn't have quite enough training to make them comfortable to work in a big space, because we had this big theatre then seating 1,700 people. And then I started to get involved in the rehearsal work, and at that time there were 3 main directors. There was Trevor Nunn and John Barton and Terry Hands, and they all had very different ways of rehearsing and styles of production that they wanted to present to the audience. Trevor was very intimate and liked to find the intimacy between characters and the emotional content. John Barton liked to find all the points of speech, the structures of the language. He used to make the actors find all the phrasing and things like that very clearly. And Terry Hands used to do mainly sort of the histories and that, and he was always saying go fast, making them go fast and loud. So my job began to be finding how the actor found their own truth in the language, inhabited the language in their own way, and yet were able to go with the needs of the director. And that was a very interesting area to work on. For actors who were working with Trevor, for instance, I would, because he was always making them go very quietly and intimately, I would get them to whisper across a large space. So they began to realize that they had to communicate in a large space, yet keep the intimacy that they were trying to get. With Terry, I used to make them, because he was always asking them to go loud and fast, I used to make them go very slowly and quietly. So they found all the different textures in the language, which then they could make when they were going fast, you see. But when just for an actor to go fast, they don't always hear what is in the language subliminally, which we also need to hear, so I used to work on that. And for John Barton, who was making them find all the points of speech and everything, I would perhaps throw a load of books on the floor and get them to get an actor to arrange the books on a shelf in order of height while they spoke the language. So it took their minds off actually working it through in their minds, but it freed them and made them hear for themselves what that language was doing. I mean, I do a lot of group work to get actors hearing what is happening in the language without trying to make it work for themselves, so it frees them, and then they come back to it in their own way and feel that freedom. If we're working on Juliet, I've often made a group. I've recited, for instance, the soliloquy, "Gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds," when she's waiting for Romeo to come and she's really hyped up. And I get a group to repeat the words, "Gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds, towards Phoebus' lodging," and they do repeat the words. And then I go back on it and get them to repeat the words, but do it at the same time. So they are galloping around, and as the speech goes on, it becomes more and more interesting. "Spread thy close curtain, love, performing night." What an amazing image that is. The images are not descriptions of something in any of the characters. They are where the character is living at the moment, and they find her living in her body. And it's an amazing exercise to do. So that's what one is always asking actors, to find how you inhabit the imagery and the texture of the language, not in a literary way, but in a physical way. To me, I mean, it was wonderful to start working on Shakespeare, and I'm being very lucky, and it has sort of changed my life to an extent. But I mean, I've been working with Shakespeare for the last 40 years, and so you become very familiar with his work. And what is extraordinary about him is he was able to write how people think in the very rhythm that they think, and why. So how often we say a phrase of Shakespeare and it just comes to us, and it's because he had that incredible gift of being able to write the rhythm of our thoughts, in a non-intellectual way, but an absolutely natural way. So I think so often lines from Shakespeare come to me. Mind you, because I'm working on it a lot, I hear them a lot, but you don't do it. It just happens that you find it. I suppose the play that really I find most changing, which most agrees with my own feeling, is King Lear, because that was an amazing journey he went on. It was the education unit at the time, back in 1988, that asked me to do a play for them, which was to do with really young people, showing Shakespeare to young people. And so I chose King Lear, which was an extraordinary play to choose, couldn't have been more difficult. But I did it with very few actors. The lines that Gloucester has in King Lear resonate with me very much. The lines are that distribution should undo excess and each man have enough. And that, to me, is the centre line of Lear. And that his journey is to throw everything away and become just a man. And that, as a very committed socialist, means an awful lot to me. Each time you do a new play, you find new things in it. That's what is extraordinary. I think that he's always trying to make us think about the politics of our lives. I think he was also a great absurdist. The famous "be absolute for death" from Measure for Measure, when the Duke is saying to Claudio, you know, you've got to face death, be absolute for death. And that whole speech is amazing about one's life, and does it matter in the end at all? And there's an absurdity there which I think rules, which is wonderful. I suppose the greatest influence was Peter Brook, because I worked with him on the Midsummer Night's Dream. That was about my second year here. I think it was 1972. He was so wonderful, and he was so with the language. I think what is disappointing now is the fact that directors, they may be very good, but they are very sort of university orientated, and they work out what things mean. They work out the politics. They work it all out, but it stops them actually, I think, listening to where the language itself takes you. And that is what my main interest is, how the language has such subliminal influences on the meaning of it, you know. And so Peter had this great feeling for the language that took you, that led you, and the purity of it, and his own vision of things was just amazing. And I think he gave me the sort of sense that I was in the right place doing the right thing, and he's always remained a great friend of mine. I always work in Shakespeare when I go to other countries, but you have to leave your expectations behind and just listen to what they are saying. And in an extraordinary way, you always know when an actor is really inhabiting the feelings and the meaning and the reasoning of the character, because they are sort of sitting down in their own voice, and you can hear their reactions to that language. But it's a totally different sound, so you just have to be aware of it. I work a great deal in Rio, in one of the favelas behind Rio. A man called Gutsi Fraga started a company. He was a very well-known actor, and he gave it all up to start a company up in the favela Vidigal with young people, and he's developed it in an amazing way, and it is now really, actually the Bank of Brazil is funded now, but it's a proper company, and they brought two gentlemen of Verona over to our Complete Works Festival, in fact, and he's worked up there for about 17 years and built this company up, and it's wonderful. And I go there and work every year with them on Shakespeare, and of course they speak Portuguese, and it's dangerous because you hear shots all the time, but there you go. It's wonderful working on Shakespeare with people, because to begin with, I've done a lot of work with young people, and I've done a lot of work in prisons, for instance, which I love doing. And you get them to feel, maybe you work on a speech from, I don't know, Winter's Tale, which is a wonderful play. It's one of the greatest plays, I think. And you get them maybe working on a speech, but taking one line each, so that they don't get frightened about making sense of everything. And you get them involved in that language, and they get such a kick out of it. And I often get people to move quite roughly. There's a wonderful speech, reason not the need, and I get them saying a line each, but pulling in a circle, linking arms and pulling against each other as hard as they can. So the actual language comes out of a feeling in the body of resistance, the language, and they get such a kick out of doing that, and it's wonderful. And of course we live now in an age which is much more sort of, ordinary. I mean, we don't like to show our feelings or anything. It's much, so we tend to mutter things and throw things away. So we've lost a little bit. I've done a video called Where Words Prevail, which is, a line comes from a Thomas Kidd play, where words prevail, not violence prevails. And I very much feel that we need to get people talking, because it makes people understand each other and stops violence.